All right, now we're going to introduce the context of this panel on this next slide. So on the left, I want to talk to you really quickly about our panel's aim to sort of lay a groundwork of how this discussion will be had. The first bullet, we're purposely talking as non-experts of AI. We're talking as people who are being confronted by AI, who are being forced to reckon with it. Like most of us, I think the majority of us are non-experts of AI, yet we're having to answer some of these big questions about what it means, what it is, with our non-expert selves. But I think that's a good thing. I think if we brought AI experts, the conversation would be very different. These people are experts in many things that are in the periphery of AI, technology, creation, teaching, learning. So there's a lot of genius in this space. Bullet point number 2, we're needing to, kind of related to bullet point number 1, we're needing to address yet another technology ignoring disabled people as decision makers and as key stakeholders in the development. What else is new? But yeah, we're here to have a conversation about what that feels like, what we can do to kind of be more at the decision-making table, etc. And then finally, we are here to bring attention to disabled creative genius and our visions of the future. And that you'll learn and hear and feel all about more as the panel unfolds. On the right, we have a couple of expectations to name. One is that there will be unfinished business and unanswered questions. This is not an exhaustive conversation around AI. We're not seeking a capstone, anything for you. If anything, we're seeking to plant a new thought in your head and let the rest of your life water it and see what it blooms into. Our panelists will also speak from lived experiences and their own embodied knowledge, and we hope, as a third bullet point here says, is that this will be a model for how to approach the tension between feeling empowered by tech and feeling overpowered by tech, which is a constant seesaw disabled people are on in terms of technology. All right, we're going to transition now to introduce each of our panelists. The first of which is Ashwini Bhasi, pronouns she, her, right in the middle. I'm going to read her bio straight off the slide. Ashwini Bhasi is a bioinformatician and interdisciplinary artist from Kerala, India. Her hybrid work merges scientific data, poetry, and visual art to explore the lived experience of chronic illness, trauma, and disability. A Good Heart Artist Residency alumnus, Ashwini is the first author of multiple peer-reviewed research articles on bioinformatics data analysis. She is a recipient of the Voices of Color Fellowship from NVICW and the Room Project Fellowship. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in the Iowa Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, Diagram, Black Warrior Review, Redivider, Rhino, and The Offing. Is that how you say it, Ashwini? Must is the winner of the 2020 Cup Bank Chapbook Contest and is her first poetry collection. Let's welcome Ashwini with a quick round of applause. Next, we got Grace Walter right here, also pronoun she, her. Grace Walter is a writer, educator, and musician. She works as an instructor of first-year writing in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and Cultures at Michigan State University, where she researches and writes about accessible composition pedagogy from a neuroqueer perspective. She has a strong interest in disability-centered responses to the affordances and limitations of generative AI in the classroom. Grace has taken a leading role in developing the MSU first-year writing program's approach to generative AI. She is a passionate Hamtramck resident and a former Detroit Public Schools teacher. Grace has upcoming publications in 2026 about living as a faculty member with ADHD and OCD and celebrating student writing. Let's welcome Grace Walter. And last but certainly not least, we have Petra Kuppers, pronouns also she, her. Petra Kuppers is a disability culture activist and community performance artist. Her fourth poetry collection is Diver Beneath the Street, True crime meets eco-poetry at the level of the soil, at the membrane of life and death. She co-directs Turtle Disco, a disability culture somatic writing space in Ypsilanti, and is currently at work on Planting Disabled Futures, a virtual reality community performance project, which she'll get to try today. And she's doing this as a Just Tech Fellow. She teaches at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor. Help me welcome Petra. Thank you so much, all. Before we dive into the panel, Petra has a little video for us. So I invite our panelists to do what they need to do to get comfortable. Maybe if you want to take a seat in the audience or stay where you are, that's completely okay. It'll take me just about a second to set this up. Is the light washing out the slides a little bit? Okay. Najee Najee recording. Adi, can we toggle the lights? There is a switch here and a switch there, and I'll let you do that while I get the video up. Fair warning, Adi might hit a button that makes it all dark. We turn the lights back on. Just prepare for that. No, see? Come. Let's go. Oh. This is Rami Marguerite. Is that too dark? Okay, perfect.
Just 2024. AI, Disability, Futurity, Exploring Collective Subconsciousness by Petra Kuppers, Planting Disabled Futures, 2024. In this video, I'm giving you a short glimpse of how I'm working with AI-generated images in my Planting Disabled Futures project. This here's my own image, sanitized at watercolor. It's one of the images for the Planting Disabled Futures design brief, and I'm now going to show you what happened with this image as I'm taking it through an AI image generator. This was the first image that I generated, and I was very interested in asking the AI image generator to think about disability, to incorporate disability. And what I got was this wrinkled landscape. So I get a strong sense of age. So we still have the same color scheme, but we have wrinkles. And we have what looks to me like old skin or like a diseased skin framework. I looked at world building and looked at how the image could generate various kinds of worlds and how a world would be interpreted. And of course, very interesting to me as someone who uses a wheelchair, who uses mobility devices, how world immediately gets us to these layered kind of imageries, something I very much associate with stairs and steps. So it was really intriguing to me how the idea of futures and future worlds gets translated into these high-rise organic images. So that was why I chose this particular image in this AI-generated imagery canon based on the initial cyanotype image. So we still have the same kind of colors in here. This is not one that's specifically focused on disability, but it has this focus on future world building. And immediately we have the sense of skyrise, rising up into the sky, rearing up, and of course the kind of mobility that's associated with that. When I keep pushing the image into the realm of disability again and again and again, I keep getting really interesting images of disease and illness, like this image. You once again see how the color scheme is still there, so we still have the underlying image of the leaf and the colors and the veins, and now we're beginning to have these kind of box-like bacterial illness, disease images that are coming in that I'm also quite intrigued by. They have this very interesting quality between plant and animal and bird feathers or beetles. That's a really interesting material going on that I'm intrigued to explore further, and I'm intrigued to see how people might be responding to these images, whether this is a form of disgust that might be emerging here, whether these are kind of like talk spoils, or whether there's some interesting interspecies mixing going on. So that there's some very interesting mixing going on. I keep pushing the images further. And I'm going to end on this AI-generated image again, same kind of color scheme still, based on the same image. I keep using one of my images here throughout to keep the strand of coherence for you. But you see here, again, one that's really pushing into the realm of disability. And I asked the AI image generator to once again focus on disability. This AI image generator does not use images of humans in any way, so I have to find really interesting ways of moving around what disability might mean. And what the generator offers me is a disabled landscape, because that's what I then asked for, a disabled world, and I get this drought world, and I get a disabled plant in a drought world with this interesting coloring going on in there. So that again is for me a very interesting way of thinking about climate catastrophe, climate emergencies, the kind of imaginations around plant lives, human lives, and sustainability. So altogether, I think it's a really interesting catalogue of how AI, plant life, futurity, and disability goes together. And this kind of image catalogue allows me some really interesting material to move my own VR world in different kinds of places. It gives me a sense of how conventionalized image regimes work, and how there might be openings for other ways of imagining disability and plant life and the joyous, richest future together.
This is how thanks you. Yes. Thanks. In which người ta bài mái chậu chụp bao
All right, I would invite our panelists to come back up. We're going to go ahead and dive straight into the panel. Give me a second here to get ready. The first part of the panel is pretty self-explanatory and predictable. We're going to go down the line, starting with Grace. Will you please introduce yourself, tell us a bit about how your work is related to disability, AI, art, and/or tech broadly, and share what motivated you to be here with us today, and give your microphone a little test.
Test. Oh, sounds good. As we've said, my name is Grace Walter, and most of my interaction with AI comes through education. So I'm a writing teacher at MSU. I research AI in education, and I'm most interested in the way it's impacting writing and other creative works, not just in an academic context, but also in a creative context. We have so many conversations in my field about AI that are essentially a mounting room full of anxious professors saying, oh my God, what are we going to do? And while I have been there and am there still very much, I'm also really curious about holding space for that and then moving to the next step, which is, what are we going to do? Actually talking it through and thinking through the ways that AI is affecting students, learners, writers, not just from this kind of cheating and plagiarism perspective, but emotionally, effectively, in terms of justice, in terms of access. And I'm in a lot of circles, as I'm sure many of us are, where when AI comes up, some folks are maybe quick to say absolutely not, never, and I fully understand and honor that, and sometimes I am there. But also the ways that AI has created access for some folks is something I want to be able to have space to think about and celebrate and explore. So I'm very, very honored and humbled to be here, but excited to be willing to say this is complex, this is nuanced. And so where this comes in with disability, for me mostly, is in thinking about how do we make sure that disability is not a footnote or an asterisk to this conversation, but that we're grounding it within that context.
Why we call this out? Yes, quickly on, which
Hi, I'm Ashwini, and I'm a interdisciplinary artist and bioinformatician. And my day job used to be to analyze large data sets and discover mutations and help in discovering mutations related to cancer or other hereditary disorders. But my passion has always been in my writing and in my visual art. And for the past 10, 15 years, I've been going more into focusing on how to use creative methodologies in my art into exploring my chronic conditions, and as a way to provide a window into what it means to live with chronic illness and disability and being ill the whole, for days on end. Like, there's so much opacity around disability and chronic conditions. I'm hoping that in my art I can then have more, I want people to be able to see what's actually happening and not just be able to just kind of hide away from it. I can see it, so it doesn't exist.
let's tell this
Okay, yeah, great. So hi, I'm Petra Kuppers, and you just saw the little video that I made last year. So that was in preparation for the project that I'm working on, and that is probably the best way of introducing how I'm working in AI. I'm a community performance artist, and I work with disability imagery out there. And the way that AI, large generative models work, is they look at what is out there and then abstract from that. So what you usually end up with is a consensus that's backward-oriented, not forward-oriented. That's a really important way, I think, conceptually to understand what AI image generators do. They're backward-oriented. So if we are coming from a world that is shaped by colonialism, by racism, ableism, homophobia, what will come up in an AI, if you look at a large corpus of materials, like a whole bunch of novels, for instance, if you then try to create something out of that, these old prejudices will drown out the tiny tranche of contemporary voices that try to be more socially just, socially aware. It's very hard to do future-oriented AI because it always looks back in time. And that's what I think I tried to do with the video that I showed you when I asked the AI generator to create images. I gave him that original image of mine, which is cyanotype in watercolor. That's literally me painting something, right? And I feed that into the AI and I say, disable that, make something disabled out of it. All the images that came up were disease, were not positive. They're very different from the beautiful wheelchair user that we've got on the image here, right? Where we have like poppy colors, really fun. It's a very different kind of image. You can get there with an AI if you ask again and again and again and you shape it in a specific way. But the main problem you have is that the first responses, and the one that many artists deal with, many students deal with, the first stuff that comes up is backward oriented. AI hallucinates. It hallucinates is based on the past. It doesn't, unfortunately, hallucinate into the future. Was that really fun? I would actually really welcome a hallucinatory mental health difference AI that shows us delicious, joyful, disabled plants. That'd be really cool. But that is just not how it works. And understanding that part is something that's really important to me as a creative artist. I wish to use all the technologies that are out there for liberatory purposes. It's hard to use some aspects of generative AI for liberatory purposes because our past is not liberatory, but hopefully our future will be.
Thank you so much, and we're definitely making sure it will be. I knew I was going to learn a lot. Listening to you all, but that already feels like so much to walk away with. We are sold AI as the future and this like future technology, but you're right, it quite literally is a regurgitation of our past. So it is a bit of a paradox there. This next question, I'll project the core question up on our screen, but I do want to contextualize it a bit first. So, you know, if you ask the average person, like the Billy Joe on the street, what comes to mind when you think about disability and technology? There are some predictable answers. You can expect that Billy Joe will likely bring up like access technology, which is any tech that's designed to remove access barriers. So think of things like power chairs, cochlear implants, screen readers. All these things might come to mind when we think of disability and tech. But some people, if you probe a little deeper, they might even bring up more sci-fi-like responses, such as imagined technology from novels or movies that can cure disability, like the sci-fi movies that have pills that can cure blindness, or injections that can make someone walk again. Things like this, these are all over popular media if you take a look at sci-fi with the disability eye. So even at the mainstream level, technology does have clear connections to disability, but here's the problem. Disabled people are getting left out of the decision-making process. And at times, the visions of the future the mainstream is selling us and the visions of future tech are being promised as ways to do away with disability. Utopic visions of the future promise no illness, no sickness, no this, no that. And it's an interesting way to think about the future. Despite this though, we have still found ways to flourish in tech. So to our panel, in your work, how do you reclaim tech for the people through a disability justice lens? And how do you see disabled people living in the far future?
Yeah, we kind of divvied the questions up. I think that was mine, right? Yeah, okay, cool. Which means that one of us starts up and the rest of us join in. So how do I think about reclaiming tech for the people? So I already mentioned I'm a community performance artist, and I've been active in that field since the 90s, which, yeah, it's a little while ago, I know. And at that time, I used to call what I now call emerging technology new media. You know, new media was like the thing. And I got involved in new media because of for disability reasons. So as a performance person, obviously, when you think of performance, you usually think of people on a stage. There's a tech rehearsal, there's a dress rehearsal, there's a performance and another performance and another performance, and then next weekend another 3 performances. I myself, as someone with a pain-related disability, as well as many of the people that I work with, who are often people with significant mental health differences, neurodivergent folks, many people with pain, none of us can do that. You know, we're just not able to show up predictably. You know, we work together. We often work around our embodiment, right, and where our relative pain levels are, and we kind of figure it out, and we find that time when we can get together and have a little workshop in a park, right? So that is the main way I work, and I look toward the new media, which at that point basically was a video, large video, to find ways of sharing our co-presence in alternative ways. So if I couldn't put us on the stage to perform together, I could use video technologies to create installations. So my very first installation was at a shopping centre in Swansea in Wales, and we had these huge screens on which were us, disabled people, many of us identified as psychos, you know, mad people, and we were in this totally happy dream journey, just dreaming away, and you could just see, you know, that delight on our faces as we're swimming at the bottom of the sea. And you could decide whether you wanted to join us on comfy cushions, put your shopping aside, lie on some comfy cushions and chill out with us, or whether you just want to just stare at us and go, can I see the cycle coming out? Where is the cycle? Where is it? What, is it a twitch? What, you know, that kind of diagnostic stare. So that was my first engagement with technology and disability, and that's been at the heart of my practice. So I have, through the years, tried to embrace all the technologies as they come along and try to figure out what is a liberatory, interesting way in which we can use these technologies for purposes of sharing Crip joy, disabled joy, our presence, our richness, our gorgeousness. How can I show the world how beautiful we are, even if we cannot reverse forever or create, some super Crip dancing with these on the stage, right? But we can find other ways of being wholly present through technology.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Paul, come.
Would our other two panelists like to chime in? Oh,
I think that there's so much in technology that is sanitized and neutralized, and I see this in generative AI. It's something I see in student writing when they rely excessively on generative AI. It's that differences in voice are removed. A generative AI voice never stutters or stammers or gets distracted unless you give it prompts to do so. And my hope for future disabled tech would be that people doing work like Petra's would continue to inject disability into the technology as a reminder that there is no neutral standard voice that tech needs to have.
For me, the biggest hope is that most of the resources of the AI, the artificial intelligence and its capabilities for large scale analysis, it can be focused on solving medical conditions. And as somebody who's worked with genomic data and like this kind of analysis, it's going to make it super easy for scientists to actually identify the correct proteins and the way a protein is structured. Like sometimes it's like parts of a protein, let's say like a protein which causes pain, right? Like which is involved in the chronic pain cycle. And it is not like a lock and key mechanism. Like there is like a groove into which certain molecules can fit. And and scientists have been trying to solve this problem for like 20, 30 years, and very few protein structures have been solved. But using artificial intelligence, they were able to solve a protein structure which people have been trying to solve for 25 years. So you can see how easy, and once you solve that, you can design drugs to fit into those grooves and things like that. So I was hoping that's going to be like this explosion of, new drug discoveries, personalized medicine. I hope it's still coming. But for me, that's where I hope that for those who are disabled and those who have different illnesses, the focus is more on solving problems for humanity and for our health and for our well-being, and not for like taking away jobs and making more money for the people who are already, in the mess.
wow. I wish this was longer. What I'm hearing a lot from y'all's responses is the two pillars of disability genius. One is alternatives. Something about the disabled person, the way we move, the way we look at the world. We look at something that the rest of the world says, you use this A, B, C ways, and we say, actually, there's D through Z ways to use this thing. Then the other part of disabled genius is prioritizing problems at the root. So like envisioning AI as a tool to solve like chronic pain, or solve is a loaded word in that case, but to help us understand chronic pain further. These are the things that disabled people bring to any conversation, not just technology, a vision of alternatives and a clear sense of what the root issue is, because we're often living at that, most loaded, like, we're living at the intersection of all society's failures, right? Like, we like to say at DDP, disabled people fall through the cracks on a good day. So when the country's not doing so hot, like, yeah, we really have a keen eye as to what's not working. Awesome, thank you so much. This next question is a little bit more for Grace, but obviously everyone can chime in, and I will flip my slide. A little bit more context. So in this AI moment specifically, so there are many people, as you've mentioned, Grace, that are meeting, there are many disabled people specifically, that are meeting this AI moment with excitement and or relief, especially disabled students and overworked professionals with disabilities in fields that benefit from a tool like AI. However, the thought of AI being used to develop things like movie scripts, poetry books, paintings is something that worries probably everyone in this room. AI has sort of crept into our lives rather innocuously. No one in this room would argue against like auto captions on Zoom, but it is a very similar tech that, like, it's a different scale of tech, but that's kind of how the way it crept in. First, these little AI captions that are like, oh great, and now we have these like data centers guzzling our workers. So the tech has sort of always been here, this AI tech, but it is getting out of hand. Many are using AI not only as a quick artist, but as a therapist and even a spiritual guide. And these aren't the things we want simplified in our lives through AI. So how do you draw these boundaries around AI usage, especially in education? What is the impact that this is having on schooling, learning, and teaching? And how do we model appropriate AI usage for younger generations?
I fear I may come off as something of an AI apologist in this answer, and I'm very much not that. I would not consider myself necessarily pro-AI at all, but I do think a key element here is avoiding the kind of eco-purity culture that has come up in some contexts where we aren't willing to talk about using AI. It's kind of this dirty little secret for a lot of people in educational spaces. And so I think a first step is to not demonize, but instead to open some conversation. This tech is changing so quickly that we figure something out, and then about 5 minutes later, the tech is doing something completely different. So it is a constant conversation. And it's true that some of this tech is tremendously helpful in the classrooms. I use AI-generated captions on my PowerPoint every single day, and my students tell me constantly, my neurodivergent students with English as a second language, lots of my students tell me it's super beneficial for them. So I talk about the benefits of that, but also as an educator and as people who have relationships with young people in our lives, all of us, I'm very clear. I don't shy away from the harms, the environmental harm, the harm to people's intellectual property, the harm to minority groups, the toxic environments, some of the training programs for these LLMs, the issues with language and linguistic justice and stereotype and bias in the output. You know, we talk about these things. I think it has to be an explicit conversation. So far, my best answer has been essentially, if kids are going to drink, I'd rather they do it in my house sort of approach. So that's my honest statement. So I do, sometimes we engage with AI in my writing class, and we pull it up on the screen and we give a prompt to talk about it, we analyze it, we break it down. So I think sometimes there is having that openness to try and learn about it while being honest about the challenges. I think that within education, there's such a focus on plagiarism and cheating in AI, which is a real concern and one I think about very frequently right now during grading season. But we know from the research that's coming out now that students feel incredibly frustrated when they're falsely accused of AI when they aren't actually using it. We know from the research that students get angry when instructors use AI, but they are not allowed, the students are not allowed to use AI. They see that very real hypocrisy. So there's this whole affective, emotional side that as educators and just as elders in the lives of children and young people around us, I think we really need to not lose sight of in this conversation. So we need to be open. And then I think the other thing that has been really important for me is disclosure and consent. So disclosing if and when we do use AI, disclosing when we don't. I have a disclosure statement in my email next to my pronouns that simply says, I will not use generative AI. Every word you get from this email is directly from me unless otherwise stated. just a simple way of being honest about the situation. And I realize that's a privilege too, because I generally have the, cognitive focus and time to be able to write my own emails, not always, but often. But that clarity is really important. And then also consent. I would never force a student to use AI. I would never force a colleague or fellow artist to use AI with the ethical issues that there are. So I think so many of these conversations are in the education field, but also just with youth, have to come from a place of us being honest that there's tension, us being honest that we're uncertain sometimes, and having that transparency.
I think there's a prayer. Yeah, it's a
Okay, I can speak to this just briefly, actually, because that's your question. So, things. And in order, I want to just use this moment to give some wider context around who does AI in disability in liberatory ways, as part of like a pedagogical mission, I guess, to let people know who's out there. So when I said earlier that AI is looking at models that go back in time and use, of non-liberatory frameworks, the past, as a way of creating its data, there are, of course, other ways of shaping what models you look at. And artists always have found really interesting and generative ways of engaging with the past canon. And so one artist that I want to mention in this context is Claudia Alick, A-L-I-C-K, Claudia Alick, who lives in the Bay Area. And Claudia is someone who works with the Crip tech people. Crip, as in Crip, tech, T-E-C-H. Crip Tech is an outfit that specifically looks at disability and technology. And what Claudia is doing, I'm just trying to speak about what their practice is. I'm not using their exact words, but the way I see that work is it's in a context of Afrofuturist images. So many Afrofuturists have looked specifically to the science fiction canon, have reclaimed space imagery in order to envisage how to live well as a Black person in the world, projecting us forward, just as I was saying, right, this notion of projecting forward. So Claudia's work uses the back canon of Afrofuturist practices in order to create new work that then articulates that around the disability lens as well. So I recommend you check out their work. You check out the work of other artists who are part of this Crip Tech world. They just recently finished a residency all around AI, so there's lots of really interesting stuff out there. I do think there's a lot of juice in us being part of this revolution. I do share some of particularly the eco concerns around the water consumption, the energy consumption. Of course, I'm very aware of that. And in Planting Disabled Futures, the core artist team is not using AI. We all agree that we're just not going to use it. Some of the contributed materials, you'll see it's a modular piece where lots of different disabled artists from around the US and elsewhere have given us stuff. They might be using AI, but if they do, it's within that liberatory framework that, creating a back canon that is allowing us to move forward into a more just future. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, y'all. Part of what you were saying, Grace, reminds me of a discourse that was happening on Tumblr, like around 2014. I don't know if people are still on Tumblr. I'll make it quick, but it was this disabled person sharing like disabled life hacks. And one of their disabled life hacks was to simply use disposable cutlery, forks and knives in their home because dishwashing was like very difficult for them and it was turning into like an unhygienic thing. And at first glance I was like, that's a great alternative. And then this eco-purist wave of comments came and shredded this person for, not using reusable forks, knives, spoons in their own home. And it reminded me of just the fact that like that organizing Organizing looks like, hey, can we get you to use compostable? Hey, can you put up a link so we can buy you compostable? Hey, can we get you a digital? Like organizing is also a tool of future making to organize this to believe a better future is possible. And in that instance, it was just a replication of the same cycles that I feel keep us like really at each other's throats for this performance of perfect values. When the real onus, like we're talking about like, a fraction of the population using disposable cutlery versus these huge organizations that are using far more petrol to make their products. This AI conversation feels similar. We cannot shame that one disabled person who has found access through it without calling attention to the fact that there are people, companies, billionaires using it at a disproportionate rate. So we're going to talk about some ways to impact that in a minute. But I want to hear from Ashwini next with this question. It's probably one of our most open-ended questions, and that's, how would you define or make the case for organic intelligence and the importance of embracing it now?
So, organic intelligence can be defined as, intelligence in living beings, living things, and that comes with a consciousness, usually, or a self of being, even if it's like a small organism which doesn't have, highly evolved neurological system. It also, like an organic intelligence, means that you have different emotions. You have also, you actually accumulate lived experiences throughout, my journey from birth to death. So compared to that, artificial intelligence is very limited in having any of these features, and that's why I strongly believe that artificial intelligence cannot replace our intelligence or even the intelligence of so many other living things that we serve, like trees and how we communicate. And so, but of course, AI is really useful. It's a really good data aggregation tool. It can actually process so much information quickly and give you some aggregated results, which will allow you to make decisions quicker. But at the same time, relying on AI or expecting it to have emotions, right? Which is something which is very much related to being a living organism. That's what makes our intelligence unique, like being able to experience all the different range of emotions, pain, joy, anger, empathy. And while AI can try to simulate those emotions, and we've seen some regrettable cases where it's been trying to act as providing emotional support, leading to very detrimental results. It's just using algorithms, and it's only as good as what data is fed, and it's going to process that, and it's going to try to pretend to care. But our brains are not going to really figure out how much ends up pretend. Like, we are not used to interacting with AI, right? So it's really important, I feel, right now at this point, for us to really focus on, not just I'm grateful about having, this organic intelligence, not just us as human beings, but everything outside us, like all the living species, which have so much intelligence. Going back to even the bacteria, which might be able to move across a surface by working with others to form like a colony, and the colony is moving with perfect, mechanical and hydraulics motion. So I think it's really important that we don't forget our own intelligence and the intelligence of living beings, especially in the time now where we are so much pulled into social media and living our lives virtually. How much we don't want to, we are still, like I was saying, our brains are not actually made to process this much information, and doesn't really know that. I was reading somewhere that a human being is not supposed to meet hundreds of people every day and see their joyous reactions or anger or frustration or some wild accusations, right? we're supposed to have like 3 or 4, maybe maximum 8 meaningful interactions per day with people. That's like the normal cycle. But with the internet and with social media, we're having these vast responses, which is like totally driving the nervous system haywire, and it's affecting our children, and adults are very much affected too. So all this to say that I think it's time for us to really focus on our organic intelligence, and especially on the way that we can, it allows us to build a community and collaborate, which is something not AI can easily do. And talking about art, I really don't think that AI can create the art that any person in this room can create, because it comes from our lived experiences, and it's very specific to each individual. And same thing with innovations or scientific discoveries too. It takes in a person's experiences and their experience and the way that even the gut instinct or intuition works. So I hope that we can try to be more in our bodies. I struggle with that a lot, especially with chronic illness. It's very difficult to be in our bodies. It's easier to be dissociated, but I'm trying very hard using some somatic practices to be more in my body and be more in community with others, and actually collaborate with other people in the community, so that we can come up with solutions that work for us, and not something that AI is generated, which without any empathy or any specific nuances, which are specific to the experiences of people.
Go ahead, please.
Great. I'm also happy to speak to that one. So I've already said that I do use new media and media technologies in my practices, and I'm totally excited by the way you're just framing this around organic intelligences. When people put on headsets, that's what I brought to you, right? Today I bought a headset, a virtual reality headset. Most people just get, the image you have is of someone sitting in a basement by themselves, barely moving, just having that headset on and just being in there for hours on end, right? Isn't that like a stereotypical images we all have? I'm very excited how we as disabled people can model different ways of being with one another and being with technology. So the way that we're sharing the Planting Disabled Futures project is in a way that you're going to experience in a minute in the other room, as little house parties, where groups of people get together and we chat. Because the interesting thing about virtual reality is you can be completely immersed in it, so that is an option. But most people are sort of on the in and out. You're just still aware that that this world is here and you're in this world. It's more accessible to many people and to many people's ways of being attentive in the world. If you're just in and out, in and out, in and out, like that. And so we are in a circle, we are engaging with one another, we're chatting in between, we're having that physical communication that is so delicious and that so many of us have had a lot less of since the ongoing pandemic began, right? So how can we find ways of honoring embodied communication, being with one another, and combining that with technology? So it's not a binary of deeply isolated over there hanging out with a machine, or happily springing like little lambs in the forest, How can we meet in the middle and make technology work in an embodied human being with one another environment?
I think the only thing I'd add to both of your beautiful thoughts on this is sort of connecting the two of them. I think one of the most incredible things about embodied intelligence, which would be how I would think of organic intelligence, is that interdependence, not just with other humans, but also with non-human kin. And the fact that I can connect with a bird or the sky or a tree, and AI can never do that because it is not an organic being that also exists in the same circle with us. So I think that's another element of that organic intelligence that's so important to ground ourselves in.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, give it up for those amazing responses. One thing that came out from what you all said for me was the part of disabled genius is also doing a lot with a little, right? That's part of one of our skills. And when we think about the amount of energy that AI uses to regurgitate back something that's already made, versus like the apple I could eat and like do so much with. I mean, not a ton, I gotta eat a little bit more than an apple, but like the amount of creation that can pour out of any one of us with the little that we need, relative, right, like there are things that eat less than us and take up less space than us, but we are not guzzling a river or chopping down a forest to produce a painting for you. We're doing it sometimes feeling tired, feeling drained. We do incredible things with energy, especially disabled people, and I think that's something artificial intelligence completely lacks. We're going to ground ourselves in a final question here, kind of posed to all of us. Let's talk about what's at stake for disabled artists and creators specifically. So AI companies have certainly taken the work of disabled writers, visual artists, and musicians without consent or compensation. And it's work that often took us a lot longer to create, that required us to make access modifications, and then carries our knowledge. And now we're being told that AI can do it faster and cheaper. But there's something AI can never replicate, and literally what we just said is written here. The living, breathing, sensing experience of being in a disabled body that navigates the world differently. The pain, pleasure, fatigue, and our particular ways of moving and perceiving, these generate knowledge and art that no data set can capture. The question is, as AI promises to automate and accelerate everything, how do you resist the pressure in your own life and creative practice? And what helps you slow down and stay connected to what your body knows?
I can start up with that one. So my answer to that is usually slowness, chilling out, taking a breath together, thinking about technologies that have been with humans for a really long time, like trance, being in a trance, dreaming, being on dream journeys. Those are really, really old technologies. Image making, on cave walls or on sand, and then the wave comes and washes it away. Those kinds of those are all technologies. We have technologies of representation, technologies of creating sensations, and finding ways of moving that with and through technologies means that we always stay with the human heart. So I hope that in some of the experiences that my team and I are trying to create, that meditative, calming our nervous system is so central in this world of all the fast images. Look what we just all talking about, right? Like picture, too many people around us. Most of my team, about 80% of my team are disabled. And we're so lucky to have people with, for instance, ADHD, who are part of the computer graphics work, and who creating graphics are specifically aimed to be both stimulating, but also ultimately calming. So we'll see what your response is, but it's been really wonderful over the last year as I've been touring this piece, as it's slowly developing, to just see people take a breath with this headset or with this inside this experience. Or I will ask you in a minute, if you were to join us, about who your plant elders are. Who's your plant elder? And that gets more or less everybody to just to think for a minute. I'm just challenging you all to think about that right now, of course. So who is your plant elder? And how are you lightly connecting with your own life right now, with your history, with your people, as you're thinking about that, the places, the land, this beautiful Anishinaabe land that we're on. Who are your plant elders? Getting us to think about that through and with technology, questioning technology, not going with the affordances that it offers us, is to me one of the most exciting things about being an artist who combines disability and technology.
This is the best question and the hardest question. I feel like anyone could talk for hours about the things that ground them in their bodies, or I wish that for people. For me, a primary way I stay in my body is through music making and community. I sing at St. Peter's Episcopal. I'm in a secular singing circle. I'm in a couple community choirs, and for me, I am similar to kind of what Petra was saying. Actually, I was thinking about the sort of ancient technology of singing in a circle, music making, and for me, that's an auditory experience, but it might be more rhythm-based. It may be a dance, a movement. Doesn't necessarily have to be auditory music, but there's something incredibly human and interconnected in making music together and making art together in a collaboration. So that is my number one thing that I do. I also think it seems silly and trite and ridiculous, but especially for us millennials and the Gen Zs after us, putting the dang phone away. It can seem like an obvious choice, but just being really mindful about my technology use when it's become so overwhelming in my work life and in many of the social spaces I'm in. But being able to create with others is definitely the great delight that brings me back to myself.
Any reflections to close, Ashwini?
I think Petra and again, this is very far as potential. Something. Yeah, that's what you put that so well. I'm able to promise everything you said. And yeah, for me, it's, I'm going to do a workshop on like this table where I do visual somatics, so like I keep drawing, like it's kind of intuitive drawing, which allows me to feel all the emotions I'm feeling and kind of release the suffering. So that's the kind of thing that helps me kind of manage my day-to-day experiences and frustrations and like sometimes despair of what I can live with. And definitely collaborations and like meeting with my friends, working on something like artistic, you know, like with some writers, some are like, you know, visual artists, but like sharing our work, or like I have a friend who's been sending me texts of his poems every day, like I'm supposed to be his accountability partner, but it gives me so much joy to read that work, and you know, like, so things like that. So community, hopefully it was helping me keep going, you know.
This is Rami. Awesome. Thank you all so much for your wisdom and your genius. Can we give a quick round of applause to our panelists here?